room today because it suits the projector, and that gives an opportunity to welcome our friends from HE, Highways England. 3 people here tonight. I'll pass over to Joe to advise the names, because Jan's here. Jan? Yes, sir. Good.
So yes, Jan Chillis, who's the Engagement and Communication Manager. And we've got Mike Evans and John Birchall, who's
we invited the guys from HE, following on the notification we got that the A14 was going to be, or proposed to be increased to an N motorway status. So they've come and talked to us tonight on that item. So, evening everybody. Item number 1 is to receive the apologies for absence and declarations of interest.
We've got apologies from Rob Conrad and Sarah Partridge for personal reasons, and I'd just like to actually have those officially approved.
Okay.
So we've got a bit of wax on that.
You used to know, didn't you? You also know.
Yeah, well, I'm just personal.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah. We actually need to vote it then.
We should approve.
Are we happy with that?
Yes, yes.
Both and seconding? Okay, I'll second it. And second it. Are we all happy that they can be excused on personal reasons?
Yes.
Yeah, we are happy. Good, okay. And to reassure you, Peter will be here at some point. He's just got delayed with the word. Any declarations of interest? If you think of anything as we come along, then you need to declare it as an item that you realise you're missing out. Because we've got our visitors here, we'll probably have a longer open session. It will probably work better that way. So I propose that we kind of bring item 3.1 forward as an open point, and then we can go into a closed session to discuss what the Parish Council thinks it can do in response to what we learned tonight. So, okay, so with that, I propose that I'll open the meeting to the floor. I suggest that we have a presentation by the A14 people first of all, then we can open to the floor, have chit-chat, then we'll say thanks very much. Then we'll ask the floor to comment on any comments that they've got about the rest of the agenda, and then you guys are free to stay, free to go with and then we'll go back to closed session. So I hope that's relatively okay, is it? Yeah. Right, Mike or James?
Mike's going to do it.
Good, okay.
Good evening, everybody. Evening at the back, on the cheap seats. Joe asked us to come along because we sent letters out to all parish councils in September to say that we are proposing a change of status of the A14, and we were giving you notification of that. And there's a process that we've got to go through. There's always a process. So we'll talk a little bit about what that process is and where you will have your input. But really, we're here tonight just to say what it actually means.
Mike, quick question. Could you make these slides available for us so we can stick them along on the website with the presentation?
I'm sure we could.
Thank you. Seb's taking notes.
When we had the development consent order for the A14, and if you go back in all the papers that were around at the time, we always said that the road was expressway ready without actually defining what an expressway was, because we knew that people in Highways England were working on the concept of an expressway. They shared with us the sort of parameters that they expected an expressway to be, and we fitted the A14 as best we could using current legislation, the current DCO, into that. And then it all went off to ministers, and ministers went, whoa, expressway, another category of road, maybe not, What's the difference between an expressway and a motorway? And frankly, there weren't many differences. So the minister said, motorway. So they'd come to us, we've got an instruction to convert, if you like, the A14 to a motorway. What does it mean? Which bit are we talking about? We're talking about the A14 from Girton, where it leaves the M11, to where it joins the A1 at Brampton. That would then leave a little bit of a gap on the A1 between Brampton and Alconbury, where the current A14M, or A1M is, that goes up to Peterborough. So, in order to make a continuous motorway all the way between the bottom end of the M11 and the top end of the A1M at Peterborough, we're including the A1 Brampton to Alconbury as well. So, here's a map, which many of you will have seen before. It's what the scheme is, and as you can see, from Girton up to Brampton, in fact it's to Ellington, where the scheme joins the existing A14, would be changed to a motorway. It will still be the A14, it's just the regulation that applies to the road changes. And then the A1 from where the A14 joins at Brampton up to Alconbury to join with the existing A1M would also be a motorway. So, ooh, what's that? What we're doing, or what we're proposing to do, is to apply motorway regulations to the A14 and the bit of the A1. What does that mean? It means that the prohibitions that we've already got powers for, the development consent order gave us the powers. Ken?
Right. Sorry, mate.
It's okay. The development consent order gave us the powers to limit pedestrians, cyclists and horse-drawn vehicles on the new A14. We extend the prohibition to normal motorway regs, which effectively means agricultural vehicles and vehicles under 50cc, mopeds. Learner drivers, I used to say, not included, but of course the rules have changed on learner drivers. Learner drivers can now go on motorways as long as it's in the dual control vehicle and they're with a qualified instructor. Clearly the colour of the signs will change, and we will be able to apply mandatory variable speed limits. These are the kit that enables us to change the speed limit depending on traffic conditions. It's the sort of stuff that is on the M25, it's the sort of stuff we put onto smart motorways. We were always going to put the kit in, we can now use the kit. If we get motorway permission. So, we're calling it a modern motorway. It has the smart road technology to manage traffic with the variable speed limits. Strategic junctions, no change there. We're not adding any extra junctions, we're not taking any junctions away. No hard shoulders. Modern motorways apparently don't need to have hard shoulders. We're taking hard shoulders out of motorways. So we're not proposing to put any in on this road. We are not acquiring any extra land. We're not changing the engineering design of the road. No hard shoulders. No pedestrians, cyclists, horse-drawn vehicles, or slow-moving vehicles. We're aiming for a mile-a-minute journeys. That's the sort of tagline that Highways England like to use. And we're doing it because motorways are safer than non-motorways. It may seem a small change, but the sort of changes that are being made actually makes it safer. So it's good for the travelling public. What does it give? It gives more safety. It gives slightly improved journey times because you're taking away the slow-moving vehicles that tend to cause traffic to bunch up and, in some cases, have accidents. Having said that, there's not an awful lot of slow-moving vehicles on the A14. We've done a count in August and September on the existing slow-moving vehicles, and it averages about 5 a day. So it's a theoretical impact in a sense that there won't be any slow-moving vehicles, but there aren't that many. But we've got to be able to handle non-motorway traffic, although that non-motorway traffic is limited in addition to what the existing prohibitions give to agricultural vehicles and mopeds under 50cc. How are we going to handle non-motorway traffic? We're building, of course, the parallel local access road between Girton and Swavesey. There is the existing A14, which will be detrunked. Local roads. We don't have any private accesses for the new route. Whoops. That's me. And we believe there is a reasonable alternative for any non-motorway traffic that won't be allowed to use a motorway, but it is very small and it is limited to a few agricultural vehicles and mopeds. So what won't change? The design and engineering of the road. We're not adding any extra carriageway, we're not adding any extra width, we're not adding hard shoulders. The speed limit was always going to be 70, but we now have the provision of changing the speed limit depending on traffic conditions to make it safer. The existing local road network, the accesses that we were building, the junctions that we were building, nothing changes there. The old road will be detrunked, as it always was going to be. Improved pedestrian cyclist equestrian provision. Where have we got that?
So that's basically saying that everything we designed into the scheme stays. So we're not taking anything away as a result of the proposal to change the motorway status.
So none of this should change the opening date. But we do have to go through a process. We have to make an application to the planning inspectorate, which says on there 2018, 2019. We're planning to do that early 2019. Once we make an application, there will then be a month or 28 days of consultation, which the planning inspectorate will run. But we will advertise, they will seek views, so that's an opportunity for the Parish Council to write in to the planning inspectorate if you've got a view. The planning inspectorate will then consider the views that it hears and make a decision. The decision will go to the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State will make a decision by summer 2019, and we're hoping that the road will open by December 2020. The question is whether it opens with green signs or blue signs. And I think that is it.
Questions or more?
Yeah, no, I can take questions. Questions on this first,
Yes,
but anything else you want to raise?
Well, I think we're limited to this, otherwise because otherwise we only advertise it as that, and then we'll get you back for other. Anybody wants to have a yes, Andy?
Does the current layout include the refuges every 1.5 miles as a smart motorway requires, or are they going to have to be added?
The scheme already included emergency refuge areas at the appropriate standard, which effectively is the standard for smart motorways. So we don't need to add any extra ones. We don't need to take any out. It was built in readiness for an expressway without knowing what an expressway was. So there are no lay-bys on the scheme. That's because we have a bit of a problem with lay-bys, and we found that emergency refuge areas, which on smart motorways replace the hard shoulder, but on the A14 were deemed to replace lay-bys, places for people to pull over into in the case of an emergency, but not to picnic, not to stop for other reasons, what happens in lay-bys.
Good, thank you. And also the gantries?
No change to the gantries.
So for small motorways, they need obviously gantry, and you've got the right number in to make it smart?
Correct.
Good, okay.
Yes, some tractors can travel as fast as Arctic lorries. Are they going to be banned as well?
Some,
Tractors can travel as fast as Arctic lorries?
yes, any agricultural vehicle, and the Road Traffic Act defines what an agricultural vehicle is. They're not allowed on motorways, however, whatever speed they travel at.
So
So it's the same.
down at Brampton, 3 lanes of traffic are all of a sudden going to go into 2.
Down at Brampton, 3 lanes.
Brampton, Ellington,
Yeah.
3 lanes of traffic are going to go into 2.
No, the 3 lanes of the A14 that come around Huntingdon, 1 lane is lost, which joins the A1. So, where the A14 will be parallel to the A1, it'll only have 2 lanes in each direction, and those 2 lanes then merge into the existing A14 at Ellington. So that's where we make the change from 3 lanes to 2 by direction. It's at the junction with the A1, and the A1 gains the extra lane that comes from the A14 and then goes up to the 3-lane section, in fact 4-lane section north of Alconbury. Ken, question?
Does this affect the road noise? Do we get any extra consideration for the lower reduction road surfacing and road buns, which we were denied before? Because it's now, if this becomes a motorway, will that be reconsidered for us to then, because, you know, whatever you say about noise or whatever, I don't think anybody is daft enough to believe that we are not going to be affected greatly in this village, and we'll be able to revisit the tarmac and the road buns if it becomes a motorway.
If the motorway, if the change from status from A road to motorway resulted in more traffic, and that more traffic, or that was a significant increase in traffic, which then changed the noise calculation, then we would reopen that issue. But the work we've done to date suggests that the traffic doesn't change. It may change by a small percentage, 1 or 2%, but there's a corresponding reduction on the local road network, and that small change in traffic doesn't affect the noise calculation. So I can't say that we're going to reopen an issue that we had before. We would only have done that if there would have been a substantial change in traffic. But just changing the colour of the signs doesn't actually bring in more traffic, because the road was already planned as a 70-mile-an-hour road to a modern standard.
So what you're saying...
Sorry, Mark, sorry. Do you think that if this had been the case when the inspectorate were here before, if this had been part of the original idea, do you think that the people involved may have given a different decision on the road itself? Like, you know, we didn't get anything at all from the inspectorate. They were just pretty, they denied everything we said. If this had been from the very beginning that it could possibly have been a motorway, do you think their decision may have been different in some things?
I don't think it would have changed the outcome, because the change in status doesn't change the traffic to the extent that it would have changed the noise calculation. And we went through all that argument about what you were going to get and what you weren't going to get based on a analytical method. And I remember the argument because I had my own arguments with the people that were doing the analytical work, and those that were sticking to the rules. I don't believe it would have changed.
So what you're saying is the noise we're getting now isn't going to be any, we're not going to get an improvement, are we? Because the noise is considerable.
I don't believe there's any change to what the situation will be as a result of changing the road status.
I can say I live at the opposite end of the village from, i.e. that end, and certainly in the summer I cannot have my bedroom window open because I can hear the traffic on the A14, and that's not going to change, is it?
It's going to get worse.
It'll get worse, and pretty well everybody in this room knows that we're not going to get an improvement. And bear in mind, you only have to see that map that you put on up earlier on, how very close Hilton is, probably the closest of all the villages along this scheme, and we're not getting anything at all from it. No benefit at all.
No, I don't deny that, that the A14, or now potentially the A14N, moves closer to Hilton than it does at the moment, and this was all considered at the time of the examination as to what the implications of that change were, and the mitigation measures that would be needed to mitigate against the issue. And we had a lot of debate about whether there should be noise barriers or ultra-low noise surfacing. The outcome of that process hasn't changed as a result of the change in status.
I live at that end of the village, and if the wind's in the east, you would think that the A14 as it is now is coming through our house, and that is now coming 3/4 of a mile closer, and for you to stand there and say that it isn't going to alter is absolute rubbish, because bigger roads create bigger volume of traffic, and that is known. It is said on the television every time there's a new road built, creates bigger volume of traffic. And for you to say that that isn't going to get any busier, sorry, you're out of order.
No, I'm not saying it's not going to get any busier compared with the existing A14.
That's what I mean. It's going
Clearly,
to
Not the
in comparison with the existing A14, we're adding more lanes, so it is going to get busier.
yeah.
But
So therefore
the
we're
change
gonna
in the
have-
regulation that applies to the road doesn't change extra width, so no more traffic.
No.
And the other point is that the new bridge that goes along the A104, the B1040 towards St Ives, is, I can hear the noise coming from that even better now, because it's higher up. It's sending it over to my house.
Right.
So, you know, people such as you have to be aware of the effect of living so near it, or it's not going to be pleasant. And sooner or later, I think the villagers will rise up and revolt.
Okay.
Too late.
Just coming back to the change in status though, does anybody here from the council?
Yeah,
Just accept
Kieran.
it?
So physically on the road, the only thing that's going to change is the colour of the signpost. Is that what we're reading from?
Physical change, what you will see is change of the colour of the signs,
Yeah.
and with that, or with the motorway badge, comes an extension of prohibitions which
Understand that.
would not be there. But
Physically.
there's no extra width, there's no extra tarmac, there's no more junctions.
And the use of the gantries, would you expect the gantries to be used more consistently, continuously, than they would be in its previous status? Will we get more light pollution?
Again,
Sorry, so that's, you're asking, will the gantries be lit more of the time?
Yes.
Right. The way that the variable mandatory speed limit works is that only comes into play when it's needed. So the cameras monitor the traffic. If, for example, there's an incident, that allows us to then put up the reduced speed limit signs, slow the traffic down before it gets to the back of the queue or gets to the incident. So that's only used when it's absolutely needed.
Before it was an A14M, what were the gantries used for then? Exactly nothing.
Well, they still have the signs up, but they would have been green signs instead of blue ones. we could have used variable speed limits, non-mandatory variable speed limits, which if you look on the A1 at the moment, you'll see them flash up in your Alconbury if there's an incident up there. The difference in terms of what the driver sees are for the non-mandatory variable speed limits is there's no red circle around the speed limit, whereas on a mandatory speed limit you get the red circle because it's in order sign with the traffic regulations. So that's the difference in terms
Do we
of
read
what...
into that they will be used more?
Yes, yeah, that's great.
I mean, if you look at the M6, for instance, they're on all the time,
Yeah.
pretty much.
And
Every time I go up it, they're all one after the other, they're all controlling speed.
And the M6 is not quite as busy, is
Speed
it?
cameras as well, and they monitor there's speed cameras on.
That's how they track the need for the speed limit. So they'll track when the speed drops. That, in terms of the way it works, alerts an operator who then makes a decision whether to start to apply the variable speed limits on.
But they don't have what we get on the other smart motorways where the hard shoulder opens up to traffic because there'll be no extra lane. You don't have a hard shoulder, so there'll be the same number of lanes and there'll be an extra lane opening.
That's correct.
So no more lights? No lights?
There's no change to those sections which were going to be lit and those sections which weren't going to be lit. And the majority of the road is not lit. There is some lighting up near the A1. I think the junctions are lit, so the A1123, the roundabout at the top, will have lights. But the road all the way down to Girton has some lights, but it's we don't put a lot of lights up these days. We're turning lights off.
And you talk here about you're hoping to make the submission in 2019. So what happens between now and 2019? Because you've already got it as a motorway. We don't need to put anything into you yet.
No, we have to put together an application to the planning inspectorate.
Okay.
So that's the submission that we intend to put in early 2019.
And it's a planning inspector who will then tell us about
And the planning inspectorate, Joan knows more about this than I do, but the day we put the application in, the next day we put a notice in newspapers.
It will be in newspapers, it will be in the Cambridge News and the Hunt Post. There will be a public notice which formally tells everybody that we've submitted to the planning inspectorate, and therefore that's when the process begins. And that will include details of how to contact the planning inspectorate with the details of the scheme. So if anybody wants to make a representation, they go straight to the planning inspectorate.
Right.
Now that's quite important to make a note of, because on other schemes, various bodies have complained or made representation or sung the praises to county councils, district councils, whoever else, and they've not found their way to the planning inspectorate, and therefore not been included in the planning inspectorate's deliberations. So it is important to go to the planning inspectorate direct. When we, as Highways England, do receive something like that from somebody, we always forward it straight onto the planning inspectorate anyway. But actually, far better that you go straight to the planning inspectorate, because then you know that your representation is going to get to the people that hear it, rather than get stored in the system somewhere.
So it's not going to be a long process as it was last time. You won't be going around with anything.
No.
Yeah, because the process is designed to focus on what changes.
Yes.
Then it's a very streamlined process. So the planning inspectorate has a 28-day consultation period. At the end of that, they close the consultation. We will then do the work to respond to those and work out what everybody's telling us and what the appropriate response to that is, and whether we can make changes or not. And then obviously work with the planning inspectorate on what that means for our application. But the planning inspectorate has a much shorter period. There's only been one amendment to a development consent order for a highway since the rules came in, the legislation came in, and that was done by a county council, and it took 9 months from start to finish, as opposed to the 18 months, which is the standard for a full DCO. So it'll be a much faster process, maybe quicker, might be a little bit slower, but until the planning inspectorate starts asking us questions and interrogating, the decisions and the proposals we've got. They don't quite know how long it will take. And when they finish, they put their recommendation to the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State will then come back and make a decision about whether, yes, it's approved, and therefore motorway, or no, go away using all work, or keep it as a trunk road.
Can I just, a couple of things, I'm going to answer my own question really. I'm assuming that the development consent order for this change in the Vatican doesn't allow or enable a reopening of the previous development consent order. And the reason I'm raising that is, at the time of your doing that, you were using air pollution standards that were already out of date. And I just wonder if those have been upgraded yet, and if so, could we apply to have those applied to the standards of whatever you're building? And it's a bit like that.
Yeah, the planning inspector will only consider information relevant to the changes that we're proposing, so they won't go back to square one. What we will do is provide the comparisons between what we said we would build and what we got the original DCO approval on, and what we're proposing now, and therefore what changes. But we will do a direct comparison to the original DCO standards.
Nothing to stop you saying you don't think that's valid, of course, as planning inspectorate.
Absolutely.
So what is your logic of upgrading it?
It's an improvement in safety, and also it improves journey times and consistency of journey. If you look at the safety record between trunk roads and motorways, there is an improvement in safety. As Mike has said, some of that is down to the traffic prohibitions. We know a lot of it is down to the design of the road, which is why we've designed it to be as safe as we can in the first place, but the implementation of motorway regulations not only add that little bit of safety, but also there's a load of psychological analysis gone on with how drivers drive on the motorway, and you can argue black and blue and so on that, but drivers use a motorway slightly differently as well.
Well, having travelled up the A1M, that is a 90-mile-an-hour road. Not a 70-mile-an-hour road, a 90-mile-an-hour road.
Nobody in Highways England would condone exceeding the speed limit.
Well,
and driver behaviours the world over are something that local authorities constantly battle with. It's the same with any walk of life, any activity we do. There are limits put down for good reason. People can choose to ignore those limits. And we would always recommend people don't, because they're there for a reason.
Is there a reason you haven't got average speed cameras on that section then? Because that pretty much kills that problem. Up between Alconbury and Peterborough, it is right. It's a racetrack because nobody can police it. Average speed cameras have worked incredibly well on the A14. I'm guessing they're going to be there on the new road as well to enforce for the smart
average
motorway.
speed cameras that were put on the A14 were put on as an emergency measure to deal with traffic congestion, i.e.
No, I'm saying is that the smart motorway will have average speed cameras.
So it'll have the variable mandatory speed limits.
That's what I'm saying.
Which is connected to cameras.
So I'm wondering why they're not on that 4-lane racetrack up to Peterborough.
It's a different system, but it has the same effect.
Connected to enforcement cameras, or just cameras to monitor so they reduce the speed?
The cameras to monitor, I believe.
So there's no enforcement cameras?
Highways England has no powers of enforcement, that's a police matter.
So all of those, when they change the speed limit, say it's now 40, there'll be no enforcement of that anyway?
There will. If it's a smart motorway, that's the whole point of it. And they've reduced the ACPO limit on smart motorways.
If you travel on the M25 when the red circles are up, and you go too fast, the cameras will flash you.
Yeah, so it would improve the enforcement if they had that.
It would.
Okay.
Is there any reason why it's not called the M14?
Yes, because it's still part of a longer route that goes from Rugby to Felixstowe, the A14. And it stays the A14, but it just has motorway regulations applied, so that's why there's the M. No different to a bit of the A3, which has motorway regulations applied, so that's called the A3M. Bits of the A1 have motorway regulations that are applied, but it's still the A1. That's the reason.
Why didn't you do it in the first place? Why didn't you give it that status?
Well, they did, didn't they? Really?
Yeah, well, they built it, but
Built
they didn't ask for status until now.
Well, we didn't get the ministerial instruction that it should open as a motorway. We were planning a trunk road, and our colleagues were working on a new standard of road called an expressway. So we were looking at the standard and saying, well, okay, we'll make it an expressway. There's been lots of deliberations about should the government announce a new standard of road called an expressway, which is sort of better than a trunk road, but not quite as good as a motorway, although it's hard to know what the difference is. If you go to France, they have expressway standard, as well as autoroutes. Hard to know what the difference is, and our minister said, oh, you know, the public are going to get confused, it's a motorway.
The question still stands. You were suggesting an expressway, it's what you told us earlier. They came back and said, no, we don't want another class of road, make it a motorway. That infers that you were actually asking for it to be something different to what you were building now. So the question still stands, why didn't you do it like that?
No, we were designing to an expressway standard that wasn't yet published.
That's another A14.
Sorry?
That's another A road.
Well, it's an A road. It's an A road without farm accesses and without at-grade junctions, because other parts of the A14, of course, do have farm accesses and do have at-grade junctions. You only have to go a couple of miles west of Ellington and you've got an at-grade junction. So we took out all the at-grade junctions because they are unsafe, which is what the ethos of the expressway standard was. But it's no different to a motorway. Motorways don't have farm accesses, motorways don't have at-grade junctions, so why confuse everyone?
Thank you. I think that's
Okay?
good enough for us to debate.
Right.
You will be leaving. You will say, well, we should probably let you get on with the question. Yes, thank you very much.
I might go home for only Connect.
Thanks very much indeed.
Yeah, thank you.
And of course, you've got our contact details, so any other questions, do give us a call.
Thank you. So we'll continue in the open session. Thanks, Dan. Are there any questions or comments that anyone wants to make about the rest of the agenda?
I don't know if you. There's a point on there which is about the speed watch, which was related to the meeting that Peter and I and Ken had with Sergeant Phil. What's his surname? Priestley. Got his name. And there's been a lot of activity since that meeting.
Yes.
I didn't know whether you wanted me to give you a quick update on what's happened.
It would probably be better if you did, because we've had. We need to keep the meeting more closed, so rather than opening and closing through the session, if you could update us now,
Yep,
then
happy to do
that
that.
will be within the open session, that'd be fine.
So I mentioned at the last meeting, very quickly, we after that meeting, just to update people that weren't here, Sergeant Priestley managed to find a volunteer constable who happens to live in Hilton, who volunteered to help do enforcement and traffic management as part of his project for being a probationary PC. Since then, he has been doing just that. Basically, he's been moving his shifts around and going out whenever he could at night, and has been issuing tickets to lorry drivers travelling through the village. He's only issued three, and then one this morning he issued, apparently early. But he said he's seen a dramatic drop in the vehicles coming through the village. I don't know if you've seen any. So he's not been catching them. Sorry? No, he's just been standing there, and if a lorry turns up, he stops it and he gives them a ticket. Yeah, no, this was so that was another part. So this was about the enforcement of the TRO overnight. So he's been doing that, and has seen very, very little coming through overnight, which is interesting. Whether it's had an effect. You're right, the part of the plan also was to get the speed van here more often, and that has happened. We've seen that quite a lot, so that's been quite effective, I think. He's written to, Ken and I did a nighttime sort of check on lorries, sent those to Sam. He's written to those hauliers and told them to stop it and explain why they had lorries there. If he'd there, he would have ticketed them, but of course couldn't from our observations. We also observed buses going through at night, non-operational, and they're not supposed to. So he's written to Whippet and to Stagecoach to ask them why their buses are travelling during a weight restriction period. What else has he done? I think that's basically it. So there's been a lot of activity going on with him, and I think he's done as much as he could. He's done a pretty good job, I think. But he can't. He's dedicated quite a few hours to that, and I think, personally, I think that's going to reduce just because it's not a hugely effective use of his time if he's only collecting 1 or 2 a night. But we'll have to question that. And then that goes into Speedwatch, which was why I raised it at that point, because part of what Sergeant Phil Priestley wanted was a Speedwatch session, Speedwatch group to be set up in the village so they could run sessions as an extra deterrence and for data collecting. Okay.
I've contacted Sergeant Priestley about 4 or 5 times about Speedwatch training for the villagers that have volunteered and how we get the equipment, and he's replied very quickly every time but said, really sorry, I'll get back to you as soon as possible.
Right.
That's the only feedback I've had from him.
That's not good, is it?
No.
I've got a bit more feedback than last time I spoke to him, because I did invite him along to this evening's meeting, but unfortunately he wasn't able to come. But he did email back to say there's a Speedwatch training event on Saturday the 10th of November.
What was that?
Sorry?
It's Saturday.
It's Saturday,
Yes.
and said that we could share equipment with Yelling and Fen Drayton. Has given me a contact for somebody at the police to liaise with if we want that equipment. And obviously I'll go into more detail when we get to that.
Okay, fine, good, thank you. Anything else, Mr. Colbert?
The only thing I would add to that, Graham, is that noticing a lot more HGVs using the high street, crossing Potton Road and going through Gravely Way. Whether that's because of a closure up at Connington, I'm not sure, but there's been an awful lot of trucks going straight across the high street from the high street, so they must be coming up from your end of the village. So whether they're coming across the green or not, I'm not sure.
They were very lazy. They enforced the Connington Road closure, and the diversion diverted all traffic through Hilton. And there was nothing in there to indicate there was a TRO on that road, so there was nothing to indicate for any HGV that would turn up between 11 and 7 that wasn't the route they should take, which is across the green and up Church End.
That's 24 hours in the high street.
Well, I'm just saying, it was 24 hours in the high street. So we had a bit of a row with them over that, but they're just getting very lazy, quite honestly. And the attitude was, well, not many vehicles. I haven't seen any lorries on that road, so why should we bother? You know, those sorts of things. So it might be worth Parish Council just emphasising to them that there is a 24-hour TRO on that. It's not been suspended, because there's lots of debate that there was a blanket TTRO suspension whilst the A14 works were going on. They can enforce it, but they have to notify the county council, they have to cover the signs, and they have to inform the police. And none of these times have done any of that. So I think maybe a suggestion the Parish Council just reinforce that there's still 2 more years of this to go on, and if they're putting diversions in place, have you Joe good?
Actually, it's a shame that John's gone, because I've emailed him recently because I've had complaints about HGVs using Gravely Way, and also the routes aren't clear where they should be going. The diversion routes aren't clear when the A14 is closed, but he hasn't responded to me yet, unfortunately.
And that was the second round. They just leave the diversion signs up all the time, and we got really shirty with them. Basically said, we'll take them down if you don't. And they were just lazy. They said, we'll leave them up in case they're needed for the next diversion. But you've noticed they've all gone, so you just have to get a bit tough with them.
I will chase him again.
Yeah, okay.
Okay,
That's it.
Right, then we'll go back into a closed session. Item 3.2 is further update on Leeds ditch water level and discuss what, if any, action is required. I'm going to ask Ian, because he has can know more than most.
Yeah. Right. Yes.
How are they doing?
Not too bad at the moment. Kept our eye on it very much so. You'll recall that last time we were sat here the 1st of October, there had been some water put in that day. There was then a similar amount put in around about the 23rd of October. So that's brought the level up. What's interesting is that we have had some rainfall. The average rainfall figure for October is about 50 millimetres, and that's roughly what we had this month, which is good. And in actual fact, the level in Reeditch currently is very little different from when that 90,000 litres was put in on the 23rd of October.
Yeah, notice that the ditches are got the water, haven't they?
A little bit more, yeah, there's a flow through the
That's
fall.
significant because the first two batches, it just went straight out.
That's right, yeah.
Okay. So are we generally content that things are going to get back to... There's nothing that we need to do at the moment, is what I'm guessing.
We're not totally convinced that will be the case. We're hopeful. We were very lucky that both Kieran Caulfield and Paul Lloyd came to our Open Spaces meeting, which was valuable input. I'm actually meeting with them both tomorrow to have further discussions on this.
Okay. So are they...
for the time being, we're okay. We'll keep an eye on.
Are the delivery team still putting water in? Well, they said they've reached an equilibrium and will leave it.
They've said that the last lot they did say that they can't keep doing this, and that we need to come up with an alternative plan really of action.
Can I just ask a question? Sorry. One of the things that was raised at the last meeting was the potential implication for foundations of those properties that don't have solid foundations, kind of thing. Ian rightly made the point that we need corroborating evidence that there might be some impact, and that was related to the point made about the water table being lowered potentially by all the stuff the 14 team are drawing out. Have we got any?
Well, that's why I mentioned it has a significance of the fact that the water that's last put in there has been retained. So that would indicate that the water tables are coming out. Certainly, you can see whether the water
tables... It's not coming up in our pond.
Well, in the dishes have now got water in them, so we found out everything.
Yes, indeed.
But and Reeves Ditch has stayed higher than it. Last time water went in, water disappeared within a couple of days.
Yeah.
It has maintained its level. So I think the jury's still out as to what the impact of this is, whether it was just a long, dry, hot summer, which we all know happened, and what the significance has been of the activities of Harvest England, and what the long-term implications have been of that. So I think it's really difficult to tell. We really just have to wait and see, I think.
Do we know, for example, from the Environment Agency, what the kind of formula is for drawing water resulting in?
The conversation I've had with one person said there's absolutely nothing to do with the road and the work they can do.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay. One person.
Yeah.
So,
it's just that it was very hard to know where you stand, really. And it can be quite a worry for some of the big property owners. I don't know whether there is something more we can do to get some facts.
So watching brief, I think.
well, we had this meeting where we, if you remember, it was thrown over as an issue with open spaces. So it was first on the agenda of the meeting we had on the 17th. And we discussed at long length about how we could actually find this out. So Paul kindly volunteered to approach an expert whose name escapes me, Alex Malcolm.
That's it.
It's for the environment.
That's right.
Yeah.
To try and see whether we can find out what the long-term implications are. But one of the things that came over pretty clearly was we're just going to have to wait and see. Because if we get to mid-winter that's still like that, I know we've got a problem.
Do we know how long they'll be extracting the sand? Well, that's the issue, isn't it? They're draining it while they extract sand. And then once the sand is all gone,
But
it's
then
stopped
there's
raining.
somebody taking it over some gravel.
Yeah, but the thing is that, as we understand it, the potential is that they're removing the water while they're draining, while they're digging the sand up.
Would the gravel people not do the same?
I don't think it's gravel that was. Once it's finished, they'll have to apply for extra mineral extraction rights, won't they? That's what
I
I'm
thought
doing.
that had already happened.
I don't think so.
It was the business.
No, we've asked the question a number of times in consultation as to whether the foreign pits will be continued.
There's no sand that's going to get handed
They
back on.
said no. There's no intention to keep running a business. Tell me if I'm wrong, but that's what I was
We
told.
did have an email not so long ago, and of course not my brain up the table of detail, but basically saying that there is a company that will be continuing to take gravel, and the fear then was, are they going to drive to the village with it?
I think you may be getting
That's
confused
the one
with
on the
the
right.
That was Hadno.
Oh, it's Hadno,
Yeah,
already
that's not this. So
I stand corrected.
So we'll keep the watching brief on that. I think there's no suggestion of any action, so we won't be discussing that. So thank you. Keep it.
There was a couple of actions came out of our meeting,
All right.
not with the air with you. There's the southern bank has obviously collapsed and created a lot of silt.
Yeah, that's fine. As far as the road, yeah.
You have to remember we discussed about silt and giving the fish a little bit more space by taking some of the silt out. So repair or making the bank put some kind of physical structure in there was discussed, and the action was to get some ideas of how you go about it and some costings.
Is that anything mechanical, isn't it?
Sorry?
Anything mechanical, isn't it? Mechanical extraction is a huge.
Well, I was thinking about repair of the bank.
Okay.
And
And
bring
then
it back to its original position.
yeah.
And so that's an action that the Open Spaces Group will carry on with.
Thank you. Yeah.
Dredging, again, that was one of the things we need to talk to the experts about how we can go about.
Good. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Item 3.3, the play park. I presume it's still closed.
It is,
Yeah, I'm afraid that was a little awkward. We got lots of questions to help us and then we closed it. But that's
spanking.
the questions.
Well, and the volunteers.
Yes, the volunteers that helped us clean it to prove that it was a bit slippery, so that was good work, but unfortunately there are certain areas that were beyond our works. So at the moment we've got various quotations and suggestions that came out in the supporting docs.
A little bit of an update of what myself, Alan and Sarah done as a small working group that we did after the last meeting.
Yep. You've got options 1, 2 and 3 here, I noticed. There's nothing new from the supporting docs, is there? That came out.
Let's have one more
Yeah, there's a
quotation
slight-
into
Okay.
A slight sort of update and a bit more information on that.
Yeah.
So as you said, the group who tried to clean the flooring on the 9th of October, unfortunately it's still very slippery, so it's closed the next day. We had that previous inspection report from Wicksteed, where they quoted some repairs and to fill the gaps in the surface. But that wasn't really to address the slipperiness, and they actually said there it would be a short-term option due to the age condition, and new surfacing should be considered. So based on that, we discussed at the previous meeting the quote from Wicksteed that we had to replace the surfacing, and we've since got another quote from a company called EB.
I'm not sure.
For replacing the surface. Now, both that we've sent out for 2 further quotes. Unfortunately, we haven't had them all back, but both Wicksteed and EB, their lowest quote for just sort of replacing the surface on top of what currently stands was between 8,000 and 9,000, and they went up to sort of between 14,000 and 17,000 for completely redoing new surfacing. We did have another quote that's literally just come in this afternoon from Fenland Leisure. That was for about 19,000, but as well as the servicing, it did include some minor repairs. So I think it replaced the swing seats. I think it took out the little spinny thing that's just in the lump of concrete, and some of the play boards, which are just like the freestanding things that you can smooth stuff about, to replace them, but nothing, no major design changes or new equipment really. So they're the quotes that we've sort of currently have. We're still waiting for one further. So we've looked into the funding options for that, and we've had some villagers that have come back to Anne's email to provide ideas on funding and options, and we've also contacted Milton Parish Council, who have recently done a play park redesign and used EV, so that's how we got their contact. So we've got details about the Mick George Community Fund, there's also the Amy Community Fund, the Wren FCC Community Action Fund, and the National Lottery funding, and they're the ones I've sort of focused on. Mainly those ones because they don't require any match funding, so you're not required to generate massive sources of income yourself on those. Although they do have what's called a contributing third-party donation, which is about 10 or 11% of the funding that you have to provide yourself in order to release the grant, so to speak. The issues we found with those funding in terms of replacing, repairing and servicing are the success criteria, the judging criteria of getting that funding. Talk quite a lot about the long-term benefit and legacy, the value for money, the community interest involvement. And a lot of the funding have like a minimum amount, which are probably on the lower end or above what we're looking at just to replace the servicing. I also think it's quite difficult to do an application just for some repairs to get community involvement and show that it's got a long-term sort of benefit and involvement. So one of the companies, EV, has provided us some options for a redesign of the complete play park, and we've got design. Show that now. And I think we're waiting for one of the other companies as well to provide an option.
I think just whilst taking that out, one of the things I hadn't realised, although I was aware that there are many sources of funding for community projects, is the sense that if it's too small a project and doesn't have a big enough impact, they're not interested. So we're trying to get funding to do just the surface. I doubt we get very far. But that said, the level of funds for big projects is amazing.
How much was it that Milton had? So Milton got £100,000 and they split their funding between Amy, Wren and some other funding, I think.
So Amy Wren got
Amy Wren,
There's some sense in which, well, there's a whole issue of if we want to get some extra funding, then it needs to be a bit project from what we can see. So that's point one. There are different options for doing the surfaces in terms of what kinds of materials and the area that they're willing to cover. Some are saying you need to do the whole thing, some are just doing the place. It's not easy to actually make a direct comparison between the quotes.
No, and
so we need to do more homework.
The more people you go to, the more ideas you get.
Well, it's certainly a different idea.
Yeah. And this was quite, we quite like this idea. This is literally the first idea they've come up with. So there's been no input apart from, I think Sarah and I met with the guy initially to explain the age group, which I think we said up to 14, although we talked about that really it's probably up to sort of 10 or 12, probably looking at the actual equipment. And we're in a limited space, so you're not going to, the limitations of what you have. Also, the brief was kind of that children could play together, there could be different age groups, and there's sort of education learning benefits through play. There's also loads that you can do, so we should talk about potentially any of these elements can be changed or adapted. So it's just an initial idea. And we basically, because of the fact that it's a large amount of money to be funded by the community funds, one of the success criteria is getting community involvement and community interest. So in order to do that, we would like to see what that interest is and assess that level of interest. One, to see whether it's something that it's worth us applying for funding for. If there's no interest in it in the village, then it wouldn't be worth our while doing it. But also to see what villages would like, in a sense. Is that, would they like this plan? Would they like something changed? And also that then goes to help with funding application. You can show you've got involvement from the village.
Like a survey.
Yeah, a bit like a survey. So we thought of the idea of having like an open hour or two in the village hall where we could put up this design, any others that we've received, potentially in advance doing a leaflet drop to inform people, and also sort of posting on some social media with some of the village groups, so the Sunshine Day Nursery, the toddler group, Fenstanton Preschool, the PTA, for example, to notify people this is what we're doing, so invite them down to have a look. So that was kind of our next step, really. We didn't really want to potentially make any decisions tonight about any of this funding, and we just wanted to let you know what we've gathered so far and what we intend to do in terms of getting the village interest levels and see where to go from there.
So it's self-sustaining. The Parish Council wouldn't need to provide any money from its. You hope you get all the money elsewhere.
So
Parish Council just needs to support.
90% of it, I think.
So you'd have to
do something.
Yeah, we would have to put 10%, the CTP, the contributed third-party donation, is something that would have to be put up in order to release the grant, and that's about 10%. So this design, for example, was quoted at 40,900, so that would be £4,000 to release that donation. And if you think we were looking at, I think 2,500 just to make the repairs to the playground, it almost seems like good value for money from the Parish Council side of things.
Yeah. And also the toddler group are really need to do some fundraising.
Yeah, I've got the chair and of the toddlers group, and she'd apparently been emailing me, but must have been emailing the wrong address.
Okay.
And she said that they would be interested in.
I also saw the Sunshine Day Nursery just come under new management as of this week, so I thought it would be interesting to get involved with them, because they might use the facility during the nursery and it might be something they would be willing to help with.
Fees sweet life.
Yeah. But one thing that Milton did say is that one of the, I think it was Amy, one of the advice that they got was it is quite useful to have some level of funding or donations in a small pot to start with to show that you're willing and able to do something.
I mean, the problem that I have is that the existing equipment is in reasonable condition. I know the floor was dreadful and there's something you can do with that, but I don't know how you get around the sort of situation that you'd say we need a new play park, but the existing equipment is quite serviceable.
Well, two thoughts came to our mind just in discussions. One was you could almost sell it. And it's interesting because somebody told us about it, somebody else, another village that was selling equipment. But secondly, you could do a mix and match. You keep some of it. And I think one of the things that struck me, and I hadn't really given it a lot of thought before, was how, depending on how you request some ideas, they can put together a sequence of play things that children can kind of grow with. So you start at 3 and you can climb this bit, when you get to 5 you can climb that bit, when you get to 7, So that they do have a learning element to it, which I think is great. At the moment what we have are a bunch of separate bits. And the middle thing, the big unit, obviously do some of that, but not the others.
But you're right, I imagine that companies show a lot more interest for a whole thing rather than just repairs.
That's good, okay.
So are we hoping to get, presumably you're giving them the same brief to the other 3 companies, are you?
All have the same.
Question from the...
How are you trying to
it's a gentleman ladies' skeleton, it's just dreadful.
we've not approached them to secure funding.
Yeah, no, we haven't made any funding applications or anything like that. You've got to approach them on that funding. I did contact Mick George about some of their criteria, just to clarify a few things with them. But what I was slightly confused about with some of them is you have to have, if you were applying for, say, £10,000 from Mick George and some money from somewhere else, you have, like for example, Mick George says you have to have secured your funding for the whole project before you apply for them, which is quite difficult if you were to get benefits, because you would then have to keep waiting for all the application deadlines and decisions down the line. They don't all suggest that, and now I've got more information about the funding. So Mick George, you can get between £5,000 and £50,000 funding. Fenstanton had 2 lots of funding from them already for 2 play parks. Erith had, I think it's all in the sporting actually, all that information. There's quite a lot of parish councils in the area who use these funding resources to successful.
Just to understand, you have to have that fund available already for them to...
So Mick George, you could potentially apply for £40,000 for Mick George for the whole thing.
Yeah.
If you only apply for 10,000, they want to know where the other 30,000 is coming from already.
But you could just ask for the lot.
You could ask for the lot, yeah.
Right.
Because it's within their limits of what they were.
Which is much more attractive because they can say it's provided by us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think George, that they
Fine by me.
are heavens actually. I mean,
We've got a provisional date,
Yeah.
because I know they're busy all the time.
Would you hope to have all 3 plans for them?
Oh, well, yeah, I hope so. We thought we'd get them by...
Sarah's been the main contact with the companies,
Yes.
but she's not here, but I'm assuming that we've asked them the same thing.
Exactly, no, she and I talked about that. They've all had exactly the same brief. And she had been advised that she'd get them all by Friday.
Okay.
So we had the second one today that literally came in just...
Too late really for
Yeah.
So what date do you think, John?
What does it say?
It is the 18th of November, on the first line that it was available. Yeah.
Just to throw something in here, this is an opportunity where we can try and steer the design away from a lot of plastic.
Yeah.
There's
I think that's a
there's
lovely
there's
idea.
definitely wood in it.
This is all good.
Well, it's halfway there. I mean, painting would be fine,
Yeah.
as long as it's
But
environmental.
Sarah raised that with these guys, and she raised it with the other, just I was there, and he said that whilst the illustrations show plastic, they're very happy to do it, and I forget what kind of wood they use, but it's very robust, and they're very happy for it to all completely, be completely wooden.
Yeah, you need that
Which I think
generation,
is
and
lovely.
they've got whole things that are just like
Yeah.
wooden design stuff that we
That's a
can
woodland setting, I think.
Yeah.
It's bewildering, isn't it, what's available?
It
It is. Actually, I quite like
Corporation
it myself, but...
Perhaps you have the stuff that's already in there. Fascinating. Okay, I mean that's...
And they sent us third floor examples like before, so they're just sort of, they're a bit like plastic wood chippings bonded together.
But green.
Yeah, there's some of
There are
that
various
in
colours,
the play park at top of St Ives. There's some of that material
They've got
in there.
some colours, like,
Yeah.
various descriptions.
I think it's great.
I think it's a great idea to have a new park because actually, the children will love it and it'll be useful. Because actually some of the toys are not very inspirational, are
And
they?
some of the feedback I've had just from speaking to a few of them is like some of the equipment's not great for the age range. Like you can't get young children can't climb up the climbing frame on their own, but older children it's not quite old enough for. So that's why we want to get people to come and look at this. And if they say, well, my 7-year-old wouldn't even use that, then we're limiting it. So we might maybe change that so it's something that would be slightly older to get people's feedback. So we obviously they would need people to know what would be used.
Have you spoken to them about ongoing maintenance? Because there's quite a lot of grass in there still, which is great. Well, that's fine. We'll need to. It's a good time actually because we're now thinking about the new maintenance contract.
Yeah.
So we could sort of build hours in to do that, but we need to get you thinking about it to help us.
I think that's one of the things we spoke about briefly. I can't pretend to spoke about it a great deal, but with respect to how much of the area you resurface. Because at the moment, I think Graham went around with his mowing machine and we're cleaning up. You've got little strips and little funny shapes, trying to mow that. It would be much easier the way if more of the area was surfaced as a play surface.
Well, in fact, most parks don't have any grass in them, do they?
Yeah.
Nowadays, they are totally, because it's safer for kids to land on that surface, and there's no mud or.
Because you get concentrated wear spots.
Yeah. So actually, I would say it's probably safer to have it
But
also.
I think the point generally about what's the maintenance side, we need to explore that a bit more depth, and we haven't had all the quotes yet to go into that level of detail. It's actually it's one of these things like you open this box, Pandora's box,
Oh yeah.
and more stuff
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
So we've still got some work to do.
Well,
The funding key things I looked at, there's slight urgency in some senses that some of the next funding rounds close in December, Nick George next one closes in January, so we're either thinking about trying to make a decision about whether we put in an application for them, not at this meeting, but we can talk about it next meeting, or we wait and then it's March, April time, and in which time the park is closed.
But either way, even if you've got the quota, even if you've got the money, it would take some time to
Well, it would
get it in.
then, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So the request tonight is that we allow you to spend 30 odd quid on an exhibition here, which I would have thought would
I don't agree with that. It's just realistically with time, getting leaflets out and stuff, you can give people enough time because obviously weekends get busy. I'm just thinking. Obviously for you to get them
it has to be November because it's just but we thought if we get a skate on, we could get the leaflets out by the weekend or this week.
An easy way of doing it is go to the mother and toddler groups. Because you get people with a main interest in one place.
Exactly. Also social media, so like there's a Hilton PTA group, there's a Facebook group for the toddler group, there's a Facebook group, so if I put a post on there for an event with all of those different things, there's lots of people that will be members of all those different groups who will see that, as well as a leaflet drop. And
What time is the meeting?
haven't agreed yet.
Well, the space we provisionally booked is 9:30 to 11:30. The idea being to have the meeting 10 to 11, and we've got time to set up into it will shorten staffing.
Okay.
You don't have to book the tent
You get setting up time.
No, that's why 9:30 set up to start.
Yeah, but you don't need to pay
Yeah,
an
but we
hour.
don't have to pay because you get time to set up.
That's it.
Oh, right.
So
and
it's even
there's
less
somewhere
money.
else people think we can display the poster anyhow.
It's quite big, isn't it?
Too linear. I don't know if we could get it sent to us on a small copy that we can put anywhere
It's a
else.
start, isn't it? It's a long process, but yeah. Jen, sort of happy. Is it worth proposing that we have a presentation of Village Hall for an hour? Yeah. Sharon's proposing that. Is there a second? Kieran seconding. All those in favour? Oh, good.
Yeah.
Fine, thank you.
With a view to bringing it to the parapet.
Yeah, hopefully we'll review the feedback to the next meeting. Potentially with a view to saying, yes, let's do a funding application that may close in December. So let's all see what happens.
One last quick question, leaflets. Are you going to need me to print a bit? That's only because I know I'm well on toner, so I don't think so.
Short answer would be yes.
Right. Josh? Peter, do you want to?
God, I keep going if you can.
Sure?
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry. All right. So, item number 3.4 is fireworks, feedback from the event.
Oh, well done, everybody.
It's a good event, and just to broaden it to those that didn't get the email, £1,800 was taken on the night.
Wow.
1,800 blah blah blah, and 77 pence.
88.
88 pence. And how you get that from the donor, I don't know, but anyway, so that was very successful. There's not a lot really to talk about other than say next year I will be standing down as the main lead, so we'll need to get a new lead in place. It's probably best if we think about who that would be, and then a meeting is held to discuss ways forward, differences. There's no point in us discussing it how we want it done, then pass on somebody to do it. So it's probably best if we have a think amongst ourselves as to who wants to put their name in the frame, and then that person will be told how to do it. So that's something to think about.
That's something to think about. Is that vastly more than last year?
Yeah, 1,400 last year. But of course it was slightly, well, it was controversial, it was more money than not, but the only comment that I got back twice was that it was a tricky, we ran out of float.
We did run out of PowerPoints. It's kept running to Feast Week and
Yeah, because we had £100 a float, but
I did
by
have to ask
the time we got to...
give us £10 instead of 9 because we've got the coins.
People quite happy to lot of families it cost £8 getting,
Yes.
so we're giving back lots of
Yeah,
cheap.
we were always giving back coins, so
Oh, Graham.
so yes, that's okay. That was a comment. Whether we think about changing the price so it's a more round figure, or whether we just have more float. That was the only comment that came back from the evening. And I think it was okay, lovely weather, and I think it was good. And thanks to our first aider.
I think that lots of firework rubbish. I don't know where else went down in the end.
I
I was
saw.
all alone for an hour.
Well, you were alone, but you had me concerned.
But I think I got to the plastic and another day.
Yes.
Did my best.
Yes. Yeah, I picked up some sticks quite close to the house.
We know where it is, but it's still not the
Randall.
Yeah, it was.
He took it to speak to tomorrow.
But I'm going to be speaking to him tomorrow. So we'll have time for that. We just need to be very careful with Feast Week that they understand that if they give us a rubbish bag to chuck on the fire, that they've sorted it properly. Because we did go to chuck, and then this wine bottle emerged in the middle of the fire. So we need to just be aware of that for next year. Right. Well, it was a bottle, it looked like a wine bottle, I wasn't getting too close.
It's in my bin, you want it? Yeah, it's always an issue about what people think is combustible. I removed some rocks this morning.
Yeah.
Quite a few tins, bottles, so it's an interesting one as well.
Then my set of injuries.
Yeah, but yes, we've got them as well.
We normally send us
Oh, yes.
the firework committee
Good point. Yes, it's a good do.
because they did a good job.
It did.
Very smoothly.
Do you think Feast Week as well? I think it should.
It'd be nice to thank whoever put the lighting for us at the entrance. That was brilliant. Was that you? Very much.
This is lights, but you know.
That makes such a
It was
difference
helpful.
because we weren't standing in the dark.
Yeah.
It was great.
It's little things, isn't it? It's the torches up the road, it's the lights, it's still, that's the whole, it's Feast
Is
Week.
it worth thanking the Zanos for providing the electricity?
That's Feast Week, we don't use that. But yes, Feast Week should.
How did you power up the lights?
But you need electricity.
That tree.
Right.
So that's good, yeah, but I think we should take Feast Week because otherwise it wouldn't be an event without them.
Yeah. Maybe we missed all those very things.
Yeah.
And not blind.
And this hot dogs.
It would be nice to know how much they make though, we didn't seem to know how much they make.
Sarah could update us.
Yeah, it'd be nice to know, because it's nice to know how successful it was for the community. Good, okay, thank you very much. Just speak.
On your, you said we need to have a meeting, so are you going to propose doing that, or are you going to do that, or?
Well, I'm thinking at the next meeting, we need to think who's going to take it.
Right.
Whether we employ someone from outside the parish council, or whether we look hard amongst ourselves.
Firework committee that do the fireworks. Why is that? Because I don't know how that's. Because they're not part of the parish council.
No,
so
it's not a
yeah.
group of people.
So it's a sort of communication. The firework lot do the fireworks. Feast Week do the refreshments. Parish council does the bonfire. But it's a parish council event, so it needs to be coordinated and communicated and tied together. That's what we used to do, yes. So it's a kind of a, dare I use this, I use a project manager sort of job. But it does need, because again today they were saying that there's more and more firework injuries, so we have been very fortunate in the fact we have had very few problems, but we do need to be careful that we stick within the rules. Yes, so I think we think amongst ourselves as to whether one of us wants to take it over, or whether we put it out there and have a Feast Week, a parish council sort of firework person, firework bonfire person. But there's a lot goes on, so it doesn't need to be sort of coordinated. If it goes wrong, then we could be in trouble. So, yeah. Okay, so I'm not proposing anything other than maybe next meeting we have. Yes, because we then get a question about how much you spend on fireworks, etc. Okay. So item 3.2 was a speed watch. I'm going to pass this down because you 2.5, sorry. Well, hence the volunteer group provided 2 more volunteers. We've had an update from Andy. Laura's gave us the update from her conversations with Simon Christie.
I just we skipped over the meeting minutes from last because we went to the meeting.
We did.
The only reason it reminds me is because I think I volunteered myself as the liaison between the Hilton Parish and traffic, and I don't think that's in the minutes, so that's no comment on that.
Ah, you did? Right. Good point. Let's just go back. Well, yeah. We also do that first, and then that would allow that to...
It's because we went to the A14.
Yeah, they completely through me.
Yeah.
I quite like them. I look forward to them. I can learn them.
You're outnumbered, Sharon. So we just go back to the beginning. We need to approve the minutes of the previous meeting, 1st October 2018, and the question was raised as to Laura's involvement
Yeah, so
as a coordinator.
it says at the top about the Parishioners, there could be a person, and we would discuss it in the agenda item when it's discussed, but then on that agenda item it doesn't actually say that we did confirm that was
This would be item 3.2.
3.2, yeah. I think we have got, was it 2 or 3 lots of people
The first thing-
do like volunteering?
The
I
first
think
thing
it's
is we're
just
doing the minutes, so we need to get the minutes amended to bring Laura's.
Yes. But if we're happy that, you
I'm happy to do it. Can I just ask if you notice any problems with minutes to let me know prior to the only because I print the minutes out, so
I
just
just
say
don't
to them.
notice now.
Yeah, no, it's fine, it's
So
fine.
that can just be one line, can't it, that Councillor Dobbins was
Yeah.
So there's the
I just have to read.
next
volunteer was the coordinator. Okay. So,
It's a little, I'm not sure that Sergeant Priestley emailed you back.
Yeah.
I've seen it, and he didn't. I was like, anyway, but I don't know, it's like short
So you've got to
notice at the
find
training
it
or
sometimes.
something.
Let me know how I
lose-
feel when I email
yeah.
highways.
Okay. So apart from that, are we all happy that the minutes are okay?
Just one small correction. Item 5.1.
It's going to be grammar, isn't it?
No, not on this occasion.
Parish Council is singular.
Oh, I said. We said that the A14 delivery team had delivered 3,500 gallons, 16,000 litres of water. In fact, they did that 5 times.
Oh, okay.
There was 5 lots,
Oh.
hence the total of 90,000 litres, or 94,000 litres.
I think that's
But that's a very small correction.
I'm correct. Okay, I'll do that.
Yes. So, more water in the ditch, and Laura as the coordinator.
Yeah.
Now we're happy.
yeah.
Okay, I propose that we accept the minutes, and they've been modified in their modified form. Have a seconder, please? Laura seconding. All those in favour?
Yeah.
And Kieran wasn't here, so he's sitting back. That's all we've got. Anything else in here?
Should be.
Yeah, okay. So then, moving slightly sideways, we also need to approve minutes of the meeting, the Finance and General Purposes Committee, which was held on
No, it's just here and Peter and
24th. That was the one where we had a chat about finances, and we came back to council and said that we were suggesting a 1.9% increase. Right. And also it gives a chance for council to think about it. So So if the three of us who were there are happy, Pete's going to propose, and I'll just be there at the time. So the three of us were there, and right. Okay, let's go back to the agenda. I like the agenda item, which was down here.
So to speak about, so I don't know if you've already got that about the training this Saturday. The volunteers that we've had so far, are you able to contact them about the training?
Well, I think the only there was people that put their names forward at the last meeting. The only other volunteers are a couple that contacted Anne, which I think I forwarded to yourself, didn't I? And Laura. But yeah, we can obviously contact them and let them know there's training available.
Yeah, did it give any more detail? It doesn't say anything about where it is.
No, well that's what I went back and asked him if it was, because so he said to liaise with Mike Brooks, and I asked if it was him that we would need to speak to about the training, all the details and liaising about the equipment, and he confirmed it was him.
Okay.
So I need to contact him.
Well, I think the next is we need more volunteers because I think we've only got how many volunteers last meeting?
Good question.
I think we might have 5 maximum.
Yeah, there was about 4 last at the last meeting, I think, wasn't there?
Is it still on the website?
Yeah, it's on the website. I know a suggestion was made about emailing the database to people. I know I had another volunteer group, but they could email the database about how many people on that database to see if anyone.
I wanted to check whether or not we're happy to do that, just because the database was sort of set up as, you know, forming a bit false, and that was my only.
Well, I suppose you could word it that you said sort of be asking them volunteers, but at the last meeting, volunteers were requested. Rather than saying, would you volunteer, we could be updating people.
No, I'm
And then
happy
they
to
can
do that.
they can get
that
linked.
database.
What do you think?
We
Yeah.
start using it for that one or not.
Yeah, and sort of, you know, when you get a lot of emails from the same place that you tend not to look at them after a while, they tend to be sort
But
of...
they don't get that many, do they?
No, they don't, but when they do that, it's relatively important stuff.
That's my only worry. If we do it on this occasion, do we, you know, if we have something else that we need people to volunteer, that, yeah.
Well,
I haven't got.
given that quite a lot of people do look on the website and stuff, don't they? Do we get numbers for that? Could we just put a big splash on
It's on the website.
It's already on the website.
Bigger splash.
It's not splash as such.
It's on the front. It's on
It's on the front
page.
page.
isn't it?
Yeah.
Did you go into the spectrum in bold?
That's a good
I
idea.
have a copy of that here. So I have it something like that. Let's see.
Yeah, so one of the things I tried is, I'm sorry, Sandon put loads of
It is a
things in
bit
there.
messy.
It is. They all
We had, sorry, just going back very quickly, we had Sarah volunteered, Kieran and Paul volunteered last time, and then we had the other 2 volunteers, so there was 5.
No, it's not.
Okay. If we put in spectrum, I'll get in the end of the month, won't it? That's it would, yes. Well,
We need to decide whether-
alternatively, then that could be, couldn't it? If we use the database with the training in mind, so that is time sensitive. So I've
That's a
suggested,
good idea.
yeah, do that.
Good.
Yeah, then we can see what happens with that one. Because if you just say, could you do it at some point, and people give people a deadline, they tend to work. Yeah. Are we okay with that?
Should we get all the details about the training where it is?
Yeah.
Yes,
So you guys
we'll
will
ask
do it, yeah.
Yes, but having said that, we've only just been told about it.
Yeah.
We don't know anything, so we have to
No.
respond as fast as we can.
So unfortunately we missed the big operation, forget its name.
Industrial, yes, I can't remember what it's
There's
called.
a big police operation on Friday just gone, so the police went into schools and were doing things with children. There was loads more speed camera operations and stopping people for mobile phone usage and all across the county. So I think that was the thing that they wanted us to get our data for the 1st of November, so that we would have some highlighted in that, which unfortunately we haven't had any speed watch data. I don't know whether any of the speed camera data that we've had, we know the speed cameras in there, it's been quite a lot, I think. I don't know whether that's been escalated
Yeah,
further.
but we have asked, I noticed on the particulars, it's called Openness. We've asked for it there. Okay. So, good. Excellent. So, get the email out to the database. And there's no harm in asking volunteers and inspectors, is there?
Yep.
Obviously the date
Yeah,
is gone, but yeah.
I'm sure they do.
And they always at 6, can't they?
You really need a minimum of 3. Speed watch sessions run with minimum of 3.
I'm being firm, we got told off last time, so opening and closing. Right, item 4.1 is the A14 funding update. Application successful.
Well, successful.
Working group to complete conditions to be approved and signed for submission. I saw you down done
We've
for.
got an attachment. It's on the pages 8 and 9, don't we, Dawn?
Yeah.
Which, between us and a lot of help from Mike Davis at the County Council, we've actually come up with the indicators, measures, and all the work that we need that we need to then sign up to and say, yes, we've agreed to be good citizens and do lots of monitoring. And all that's left, apart from that detail, which Ian and I have gone through with calculators and measuring tapes practically, is to make sure that it's the roles at the very end, the last page 9, who does what. We're suggesting that the delivery contact, you ask me what these terms mean because there's not an explanation much of them, is Joe, as is the contact for media coverage, that Ian's the contact for visits, because there's a amount of visits, and he knows better than myself and I do what we're talking about in terms of possible routes. Volunteer contact, and again, I'm not quite sure what this would involve, but it's for A14 IDT, what was IDT? Staff to volunteer with your project. I'm happy to be that contact person, whatever it might be.
Yes.
And either Joe or myself as the monitoring contact. But that's really basically keeping in touch with the County Council when they do the feasibility study.
Yes.
So I don't know what name you want to put there. Both Joe and I said we're happy to do it.
Yeah.
And we need to offer them some dates for visits. Now Mike Davis and his information said they're not likely to start before January, end of January. With a view to completing the feasibility study in the summer.
Yes. I mean, it's an unusual form. So the form is meant for different projects where we are doing it. Effectively, we're getting the money and pass from somebody else, and then we have to hope that they get on with it. So it's a difficult form to fill in, so we're going to be doing that.
So if you're happy that we just finished off with clarifying the roles of who does what, we need to get it in by the 11th, is it? Anyway, we had a month, didn't we? We had a month from the date of their letter, which is mid to next week sometimes, the latest. My preference would be to get it in by this week.
In this case, the bottom, they send it back.
Yeah.
I noticed that there's, so as long as everyone knows that they're on the list, everyone who's on the list knows that they're there.
Yeah.
Nobody will put anyone's name down or something.
And there is one mistake on the draft that we sent, page 8. At the top it says impact category. And what is in there is their example. Our impact category, the theme that we chose in our application, is projects to reduce vehicle use and promote cycling, walking and other non-motorised users. That was the theme. It's not directly to do with well-being and safety and things. It will be indirectly, but the theme at the top of that.
Oh, wait, okay, got it. Heading, yes.
Yes,
yes.
Safety.
When I saw that, I kind of panicked. I thought, I don't remember saying that. Oh, how do I get that? How do you measure that for a non-motorised user? Well, by the way,
this is what we're trying to measure. We've got to measure whether.
Yeah, oh, that'd be great. Good. I was just going to say that later on, you've got stuff in highlights, but there are some gaps in emails and things, aren't there? That you obviously go
Well,
through.
the yellow highlights are, for example, it says target number
Yes.
of what the indicators will show.
Oh, I see. You're
And I just highlight hours
Yes.
because how do we know what the numbers mean?
Yes. Yes. Good point. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the reason that's there. And then the back end, it's sort of greeny blue coloured. And that's just for us to just make
Yes.
sure we're comfortable with who's doing
Yes.
what around
Yes.
there.
I was just pointing out that Ian's email isn't there, neither is Joe's, but
No, I
Good
just
research.
because I was going to wait till you guys
Right,
said it.
yeah.
Okay.
okay. Anybody want to add anything? Very well.
Oh, that's brilliant.
That's good. Well done. Thank you. Team. Working group, what did you do? Well done.
Okay, so I'll leave you.
Yes, yeah.
Right. So, item, where are we? Update easement, funding. 4.2, is it? Update on easement and pet properties?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right, so right here.
Very interesting.
There's just a, in your supporting documents, I can find it. There was a summary of where we're up to. Shall I read it out? We're supposed to, isn't it? Is that okay?
Yeah.
No names, is it?
Yeah.
Okay. Valuation amount of £37,500 have been passed to the applicant. A request was made to see the complete report. PC had an obligation to do so, but it was agreed that it would be happy to share the report subject to the valuer's permission. That was sought, agreed, and various names were redacted, but the report went out generally in that form to their solicitors. Despite advising the applicant at the end of September that if a satisfactory easement was not agreed within 21 days, that the existing hardcore that's been put there should be removed and the land restored, this has not yet happened. Therefore, on supplying the full report, which now has been sent, I believe, further 14 days have been allowed before any further action is taken. So that's where we're up to. Watch this space, really. Okay, so it's ongoing. I think.
So when are the 21 days? Or
Well, we're down to 14 days, which the report went out about a week ago.
Not at the end of last week.
So it's almost out. Okay. Item 4.3. Green open spaces. You normally lead on this, so you have to do it. Updates including paths, trees and CC replanting tree policy.
Yeah, I'll leave that one. So we met on certain things, as we mentioned. Other things on the agenda, other than reef stitch, I'll go back over that again, was tree work. We discussed the survey and the initial costs that came from Glenn, which are quite a lot this time. So we're in a brief discussion there. We are trying to arrange the second walkabout with the other contractor to get a comparison quote, and then here you're going to do the priority.
That's right, yeah.
So that's just pending. We did do some tree work on the 27th, so where a good group came out. So many thanks to Sarah's not here, but she was there. Ian, of course. We had help from Duncan and Michael, which was, as he normally does, it's very, very useful. Swinburnes were there, so we had a good turnout, and we got through, we calculated around about £700 worth of work.
Yeah.
So then we've taken that off the quote. It's interesting, we're there for 3.5 hours, solid work, 8 people, about 28 hours of work. So if it's £700, it's £25 an hour, please. But no, it went well. That was quite useful. I mean, there is a limit to what we can do ourselves, but we might as well do what we can.
So we've also, because of the size of the amount of work, we will try and step it up. We've already talked about doing another session. We'll probably do another one next year as well. So and see whether we can get through all this. There's also ID customers which have got to go on with this.
Is it worth asking the Pollard group to help?
Yeah, we have done that in the past. The only problem with this sort of thing we did on 27 is it's all chainsaw work, and you've got to be a bit careful of the numbers. You've got to make sure everybody knows what they're doing. So.
Yes, I know, but if what I mean is if you're going to repeat that and do more tree work, the pollarding crew will have chainsaws as well.
Yeah, we just need to be a bit careful. We need Parish Council activity as well, even control. So,
No.
2 or 3 chainsaws is the most you can do.
Yes.
Yeah, so we do keep a limit to it. But things like ID cutting, we've had that group come out and did some right in there in the past.
And that, even that can be dangerous, can't it?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, not to us, but there was one person trying to trim his fingernails.
I discovered that you can be allergic to hydrogen.
So, we then had a chat about the maintenance contract, so obviously that's coming up in April. So we're going to review it. We'll probably meet again on that before we present a new draft to council. So hopefully in the new year we can start handing that out to potential contractors.
Just, I mentioned this to Ian, but we had a tree chappie in helping us with a dead tree. But he remarked on the number of dead branches along the end, and not just on our side, on the other side.
We've got a lot of dead ends. So a lot of those you see the thing on there.
Yeah, I must admit, I did get back to it, didn't I?
Yeah,
Mentioned that we had identified quite a few. Hopefully the two lists the same. Yeah, thank you.
Paths. So the original date, you remember, for starting the paths was August, September time. For various reasons, which I won't go into here, but it's been delayed. The last hard date we had was the 8th of October, which came and went. I've now got 12th, 15th of November potentially. But I think I'd like to propose that we actually move this now back to the spring, spring 2019, because if any repair work, any reseeding is all going to take, it's not going to take now.
No.
So it's also, if we get a wet period, it's going to be muddy, messy, and the village is going to be like that all weekend, all winter.
Or smell.
Yeah. So
it's going to be dangerous.
Makes sense. Sort it out, isn't it? Stay at house.
yeah.
Do you need that approved or can you?
Well,
Yeah, I think we probably should agree that and approve it.
yeah.
Also, just mentioning, certainly along towards the church, there are some bits of wood come away, and I did actually speak to a parishioner and come off their bike and badly bruised herself because of wood, so I don't know whether or not we can just have a look at bits along there that are currently loose and we can take them away or something.
Must admit, when we did tree work, there was a piece that was removed from along that bit that you're speaking
I don't know,
of.
I think I've seen some since then, I think.
So if we propose then that we tell the contractor not to start before April?
Yes.
Spring April.
Oh, March.
Well, March.
It will still be very wet in March.
Okay, so if we propose that sort of wording, we'll ask Joe to tell the problem. Thank you. Have all the paper that we delay until, yeah, Laura? Yeah, fine. Yourself and Peter will be good. Thank you.
I don't know too much about the other item.
They want to plant a tree.
Yes.
They want to plant a tree.
That's very nice, we just need to decide where. don't we?
Yes, exactly.
Yes, they emailed, asked on to say that apparently in June 2017 they removed a tree from Gravely Way, this Cambridgeshire County Council, which was dead, and their tree policy speculates that they should, should replant a tree somewhere in Hilton. So it says it doesn't have to be in the same location. They can be in Parish Council owned open space or park. So if we can think of
Actually, just remind me of something I forgot to mention. We've been given 5 oaks,
Yes.
which we've been in places where the ones that didn't survive the dry summer.
Do they have to plant a tree? Or can they give us a tree for us
I
to
don't
plant?
know. I can
And they can give us a nice 6 or 7 foot high oak.
We put it in the wilderness.
No, we can put it with a quaint oak. It's fine.
Yeah.
Oh,
There's a couple of 3 suggestions. One is if Queen's Oak does actually need replacing, which it looks as though it could do, we could ask them for that. The other suggestion I mentioned briefly to Kieran before was just as you go towards the church from here, just the far side of the bridge, the first bridge that you come to, we've taken a hornbeam down there because it's very dark. There'll be another hornbeam that'll probably come down in the next few weeks there. And what I thought of doing was, in place of those 2 trees, to have 2 or 3 silver birch. They're a lot more open, they're a lot more light through, because that was the problem with hornbeam. They're very dark trees to get underneath. So I thought 2 or 3 silver birch there.
We've got any silver birches?
Most silver birches we've got are privately in private gardens. But in fact, silver birch is native to the eastern part of England, whereas the ordinary birch is native to the west. So we are in the silver birch area here.
Well, the first question is, will they splice the tree for us to plant?
Yeah.
Because if they insist on doing it themselves, then
I think it's location.
Can be told at least what it is.
What sort of tree?
Yes. Okay. Tree pays off for.
so,
so will they supply a tree
Yeah.
and plant, or will they,
Yes.
or will they
Yes.
plant a tree?
But in essence, thanks very much. Continue the conversation.
Okay.
Did that tree
about the
trees
trees
that
that we discussed.
So that's good. Yeah, moving on.
The one that came up.
Yeah. Laura's was
I just wondered, we discussed quite a few months ago about the tree planting and the memorial option.
Yeah, I know. I went back to the person about that, but they didn't ever
So
respond.
we talk about taking that forward as an idea, going over with it, didn't we?
I think because they haven't come back, yeah, I mean, I guess that's when we get another request and we can kind of take that forward. I think we all kind of agreed on it as an idea in principle, didn't we?
Book, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. Item 4.4
Buses.
is the community bus service.
Yeah.
Not an awful lot of those have been released because that was service finished at the end of October.
Yeah, no buses. As of this afternoon, they've counted up 1,300 responses in total from across 11 parishes, so it's not a huge number per parish. But they were still inputting some of the paper ones. Joe did ours very quickly, thank you, Joe. So the next step is, I have some correspondence on it this afternoon. We need to meet the parishes, control, we need to meet in terms of what does it all say, what can we do with it. And the original plot was to take the county council so they're going to add it to their data about bus services across the county, and to take it to bus providers, the firms that provide the buses, to say, given this type of demand, etc., what might you do for us, and just keep hammering on those. That's as far as I've got. I'll keep you updated.
Good, thank you. Moving on.
Should we thank everybody who submitted
Well, presumably we could ask Peter to be put in spectrum, wouldn't we? Yep. Because that could be an update. You do a little report with spectrum and that can be
who the forms are from, that's what
that can be general text. It can be the webs presented and thanks to those that do them. So yeah. Item 4.5 was the revised planning policy that came out at the last meeting. There was a comment made about the site visit and wanting to making sure that those on the committee were familiar with the application. So I have revised that. I don't know whether you've seen it. We can. And there's a bit, I haven't changed anything apart from the last page, not the annex page, the last page where I've made it a bit clearer, put it in red, and rather than as a list of things, rather than just a line, I've made it as a list. So with the sort of strict instructions that members will actually go and view the application site. So I hope that's addressed the concerns, and I would like that that be put in our documents to media lot, just check that through.
So where it says the location of the application as viewed from the highway, that is actually going to the site.
Going to actually go in there. Or you could do it on Google. You need to be familiar where it is. It's up to the members to decide how they can best determine that people see that.
Just one comment. I just wondered how we decide what's a complex application and what's a basic application.
Indeed.
So my stance is that I think all applications should be treated equally.
Yes, you could actually write it the other way around. It says all applications will be visited unless there's a reason not.
Same thing. How do you decide
Well,
which one?
not really. It's a kind of set that you have to see as a considerate rather than.
Yeah. Well, that's what the problem we had last time was that we felt that there wasn't enough emphasis on actually going to see it. I think I've addressed that.
I think it was me that made the comment before, and I suppose I still have an issue with if it's who decides if it's a complex application.
What is that?
So, as a parish council, we should be treating every application in the same way.
I disagree.
Do you?
I think it's pretty obvious when they're complex and when they're not.
If you've got
I think if we're a bunch of reasonably intelligent people, we can't figure that out. We don't need to legislate for it. Some applications are just very, very straightforward and simple.
well, perhaps we could be naughty and enter into an email discussion when Joe tells us that we've got a. Okay, I propose that we put this through as it is and see how it works, because there are some things in there that we don't currently do at the moment, so we can use it as a starting point. It's better than what we had.
We'll do it in 6 months, see what
it goes.
The only other thing I was just going to ask is about loss of light, because I thought there was no right to light. So in halfway down it says effects on individual buildings such as overlooking, loss of light, overshadowing, visual intrusion, noise, disturbance and smell. Which is interesting. I mean, obviously this was set up and advertised. But loss of light can't be included there, so you can't.
If you look at, there's a section on this in the local plan where they say that schemes which have a severe effect, I can't remember the word, but it's something along the lines of there's an effect they would expect. It's to do with, it's under the heading of design, that they would not necessarily support a scheme that wasn't considerate to maybe impact on other people.
Maybe it's a consideration rather than a right. That's okay. So, I'm proposing, here is it. Are we all in favour as a starting point?
And that we review it in 6 months.
Sharon will say anything? We've got that fine, Cora? Yes?
I'll go for it and the review.
Okay. So we've got 6 for renewal, so the 3 years went past fast.
We've actually got until it's the end of December to decide.
Great.
I went back to the company that we had prior to changing we currently have, and asked them for quotation about 3 weeks ago, and I've been chasing it pretty much every day for the last week, and I still haven't had it. So it just sort of showed why we changed in the first place. But obviously it would be good to have a comparison from somebody else before we make any decisions.
There's 2 questions. The current provider,
Yeah.
is he good?
Yes, they're really quick at coming out and dealing with issues.
Right.
The light out here was playing up last week. They came out, they didn't sort it out, but they came out the next day. I had to kind of let them into the call because the switch kept tripping.
Yes.
So I spent quite a lot of time here with him organising that. Yeah, so they're very quick. I haven't got any complaints with them.
That's good.
And
is there quotes in the last?
Yeah, I think it's about £20 difference.
Why don't we just do it?
The last, did they give us a contract if they discount for 3 years?
Yeah, for 3 years you get 5%
Yes.
discount, so which we signed up to do last time.
But presumably the quotation is valid for at least another month.
Yes, so I think it's probably worth just waiting and seeing. Yeah, I've got my second and third day of training tomorrow, so I will just check the parish there if they can recommend anybody else, because obviously it'd be a good idea to have another quote on top. But
But these actually recommended to us
by lots of parishes last time,
Yeah.
And
The fact is that they've been good.
Sorry, no, I have to know what the quote, I know it's attached, but I haven't got it open.
I think
It's
it was.
£141 per quarter.
It's not so.
£141 per quarter.
That's
Plus VAT.
Yeah.
Certainly,
I think last year it was something like 579 for the year for that, and this year it's 595 or something like that.
But 5% discount for 3 years, maybe 565 a year, which is we just need to know for the next 3 years what we actually pay under the existing.
At the moment we pay 153.84 a month. That's including the VAT. I think it was 615.28 for the year with the VAT. We currently pay.
So what we need to know is exactly what we're paying, so that we can compare at the next meeting. Yeah. So we pay a quarterly.
Yeah.
I believe. And are we paying more or less than £141 per quarter?
At the moment.
Yeah.
It's slightly less, we're paying slightly less, it will have gone up.
So we need to know for the Parish Council exactly what we're paying. Okay. Yeah?
Right.
For the next meeting.
Okay.
Yeah?
What we're currently paying.
What we're currently paying.
Yeah.
As a comparison. Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah.
I think that's what 615 was. I did do some calculations.
You said it really down to
So this is less.
Yeah. No, before VAT it's less. The 615 includes the VAT.
Okay. So we've got a quote in, and we'll have a further one, but if not, we've certainly got enough information to make a decision at the next meeting. Okay, request from Feast Week to hold Feast Week on the Green for a week on the 28th of July 2019. There was a comment on this. I mean, obviously it would be hard to say no. But there was a suggestion that we ought to say yes, subject to us seeing their insurance. Is that something you've learned from your training?
Particularly with sort of taking into account the Sunday when we have the floats and everything, when there's bouncy castles and stuff like that, because it's on our land. If they don't have the right insurance and stuff in place, then it can cause all sorts of problems. So I just want to make sure they have got liability insurance for the fireworks and stuff. So I'm sure, but it's just
literally there's been an issue with the current insurance policy, so they are going back to the previous insurance company.
Yeah. Well, yes, it's nice to tie things up, isn't it? So there's no harm in it.
And I think it may well, although we put Sunday the 28th, May well be from Friday the 26th actually, so I'm not sure if they've got the dates quite.
Why Friday? What's on Friday?
Because
The marking normally goes up on a Tuesday.
The marking goes up on Monday and Tuesday, so that'll go up on about the 20th.
they made it on Friday night usually.
Yeah, they were planning to maybe do a hot roast on Friday.
Oh, so they're stretching it.
Well, because they're
Feast
desperate
week in a bit.
for fundraising this year.
Perhaps we could go back and ask them exactly what that is.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it seems that. Are you not trying to do that?
And when the market
I'm not on Feast Week.
Do you know?
I'm
Yeah. Yeah, because obviously, I mean, this is good notification when Feast Week is,
Yeah.
but what we need to know is when they put the marquee up.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a Tuesday, yes. Yes. I mean, I don't think it'll be a problem, but we're thinking that it'd be nice to go back and. Okay, that's good. Respond with a bit more detail, please.
High voltage is Joe.
Yes. Yeah, that might be. Yeah, okay. Right, so that's good. Item 5.3, software for new laptop update.
Yes.
Did you talk to your friend?
I spent 2 hours today and finally got through. I had to go to my neighbours to connect to their Wi-Fi because I can't connect from my laptop. They couldn't gain access to find out what key I had on there. And anyway, but the good news is that the current software is, I can take it off and put it on a new PC. So there won't be any extra to pay, but it's taken me a long time to get that little bit of information.
Do pass on our thanks to our neighbour.
Yes.
Good community spirit.
Yes. I just opened the garden side.
What's the software are you being transferred?
Oh, just Office. But yeah.
And what
Yeah.
version?
I think it's Windows 10. Yeah.
I just wondering if you were trying to get by on something as we are.
No. So we did reinstate it a few years ago. I think 2015 we reinstated. We had to reinstall it. But yeah.
So is there an update on the laptop?
No, well, I didn't want to buy it because I didn't know. Obviously, it's not. Yeah. I thought I can't really go and buy something and not have any software to put on it. And so I thought I may as well wait and get it all sorted. So no, I will get that this afternoon.
Is there any way we can get that back then?
Yeah, we can always claim that back. Yeah.
Good. Okay, thank you much. Item 6.1 is to authorise payments of any bills, including clerk salary. So this, following on from the last meeting, Joe's put in some hours, additional hours he's done for training. So that's on there. Transfers to the accounts. Okay, so there's John Carter. He's also going to go to the cricket pitch. So, well, might get one more this year, who knows? Looking at the rings, but that's fine. Handyman duty, Bernie's still around. Eco-Just-See, donation, salary, extra hours of 53, expensive postage at £1.34. So, anybody wish to discuss, or are we happy? Shall I close the tax? Paid?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Whereas our second.
Peter second. All those? And other round.
Silence.
Yeah. Okay, so that's myself and Peter. Anybody? All in favour?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's good. Thank you very much.
Yeah, sorry, were you in favour?
Sorry, yes.
Okay, so then moving back down to
Oh,
right, precepts. And in the last meeting we discussed that the general finance and services had put forward a recommendation of 1.9%, which would be an increase of £530, and therefore the total we get on our precept would be £28,620. We don't need to make a decision tonight because we have to submit on the middle of December sometime. So it could be put off to the next meeting, but I mean, I've had no comment.
Can I just ask some stupid question? But the precept is the amount that you pay as part of your council tax fees that goes to the Parish Council.
Yes, so you pay
And we
your...
set it at the Parish Council.
Yes, so you pay to HTC and then they give us what we ask for. very...
Can I just ask another little question? What's, I can think of lots of possibilities, but what's the justification for asking for increase? And do we have to account for that increase in something?
We don't have to account for it. We go through the budgets. The 1.9% is what the district council are allowed to increase the rates by. If they go more than that, then they have to have a referendum. So we kind of felt it was responsible to stick by the same guidelines as they've got. So it seems like an arbitrary number.
Yeah, what's our argument for putting it out?
Is the increase to cover the fact that things like the electricity will increase and that all the other bills will increase?
Everything increases in the same 1.9% is probably below inflation. So I mean, it's kind of, and it's keeping things going. Otherwise, you then find yourself at a sort of level and you have a huge.
Sure, I suppose the point of it is as long as we've got a rationale for doing it.
Well, you don't know yet. I think is that the tree work is going to be tree work is substantially increased.
Yeah.
It's considerably done to us, but it's still absolutely has. Yes. So normally we get a quote of about
The budget's 2.5.
yeah, 3,000, 3,500 we get a quote for this year to double that.
How do we decide what things the preset pays for? Wait, what's the rationale for what the preset pays for?
Preset pays for it, also ongoing maintenance things. Capital projects are slightly different, aren't they? We have grants of SIM or
if we get.
so there's like car salaries and living expenses, all that comes out of the preset.
So the preset pays club salary, insurance, so we have an insurance policy which we have to pay for, which is about £1,300 a year. The maintenance of the green, handling work around the village, repairs to paths and ditches and ponds, and it gets street lighting, but because of the street lights, 27 are Parish Council owned, the rest are owned by Cambridgeshire County Council, so we have to pay the lighting on those and the maintenance of those. We pay for lighting on the church, we pay, which comes, and then obviously you have to pay for the hire of the hall and the hire of the church when we have planning meetings at the church. There's training, there's repairs to play park.
Yeah.
Yeah, pays for maintenance of the
I think it raises a point about, is there a point where this group would say, right, do we want to shift balance of where that money goes? I know there's not a lot of fluid, but that's a question worth asking themselves and so on.
So, we haven't had any deal apart from what we discussed now.
Take Cambridgeshire Council's view and not increase preset and then force unpaid leave on their staff.
Oh yes, I'm not suggesting not to do it by the way, I'm just really exploring.
Well, they are not Cambridgeshire County Council members' staff. You could, as a councillor, neglect that, but things do actually go on, you have to actually.
What do you know? I'm not asking
No,
a question whether
Peter's
to do it.
obviously had a very busy day. So, do I propose that we actually pass it through now, or shall we stall it to December?
Unless anybody needs more time.
Oh, I don't think there's any reason to
Well, no, I really haven't. Okay, so I propose that we clear that item from the agenda and that we apply for a 1.9% increase, which will be £550, total of 28,620. I'll propose that.
I'll second it.
Ian's a second. All those in favour? Dora? Okay. Cool. That's it. Item number 7 is councillor items. Information only, no discussion, no decisions. Rob.
I do actually, yes. So firstly, I've got a couple, sorry. That'd be great. Then I couldn't see that we had any Parish Council social media such as a Facebook page, and I thought it would be useful to have so that we could share things like events or notices in social media as well as having notice boards on the website. I noticed that most of the other groups in the village have such things, and I was thinking it would be quite useful to have. But when we do leaflet drops, we can also announce it on the social media platform, which a lot of people use in the village. Firstly. just because I was looking at the funding, just to comment that lots of parish councils apply for these fundings quite a lot, and there's no substantive apply for refurbishment, so it's just something to consider for other things, projects we might have in the village. And thirdly, the council meeting rules, so to speak, for parishioners. I just wondered if it might be worth putting some just brief outline of things in a nice possible way in the spectrum, because I don't think many parishioners necessarily know the rules, and I think it can become uncomfortable during meetings when you're saying to people, please don't interrupt, please, because I don't think people necessarily know what they are and are not allowed to do, or how to discuss something at a parish council, or who to discuss it with if they want something on the agenda. I don't think necessarily everyone would know how to do that, so that's it.
You got that, Jeff?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nothing from me, thank you.
Karen?
Actually, I would just add to that as well, that I don't think we get a lot of parishioners because although we get the supporting documents, and I know we can't share everything, but I'm not sure what the parishioners sort of have the full information. So if you're sat in the audience and you don't kind of always know what the choices of A, B and C are, maybe it's not very exciting to come and sit and listen. So I just wonder if there is a way that we can maybe share a bit more information
Prior to the meetings.
Prior to the meetings, either in the agenda or I don't know how you do that, but still obviously abiding by the rules. Like, for instance, which supplier has provided quotes, maybe, or if you've had a letter from a parishioner that would be breaking confidentiality to share who's voiced that opinion. Obviously not if it's controversial, but
Well, you could have some.
Well, Sharon wants to do that.
I'll just go and sit there next time.
Is that it? That's it.
Just to let you know that I'm meeting with Julian Massey, who is the Waterville lady, on the 16th of November. And I now find she's also the consultant to the A14 group about ponds.
Oh, so very useful.
So I'm taking and we'll be discussing reed ditch as well. So just for your information there.
Thank you. Peter?
Thank you, Graham, for doing this this evening. Sorry I was late.
I've got one comment, is that we have the Beacon on Sunday. I'll be sending an email around and volunteers to assist. Watch out for that.
It's my birthday, so I'm
Is it? Well, we've got the lights Thank you very much. Could have gone one, but we learned a lot about the motorway. That's good. Well, Peter didn't do what it is.
That's what we learned.
Sorry, meeting closed.
Yeah.